To be alone in the woods, unaware of your surroundings, injured, not knowing if she could trust her companion, her mate, made Beth wonder how different things would be if she was still home. By this time, her father would have been happy, or as happy as Carl could be for his only child. His daughter would have now been a full-grown wolf and engaged to a man of his choosing. And had they been engaged, this man would have been Henry, who Carl loved and adored like his own son. As for Beth, she figured that she would have had her engagement ceremony to Henry by now. There would be a gigantic ring on her right finger, which her father had chosen and shown to Beth, taking out the element of surprise. Her pack, the Johnson pack, where she had grown up, would be happy in all and cheers. The celebrations would be high and nigh, just like they had been the night she was born, for the pack would have found their future alpha, and along with him, his Luna. For a pack to find their Luna was of great importance and often considered a blessing from the moon goddess, for it was the Luna who kept the pack running. The alpha was undoubtedly significant, and without him, there would be no pack. Still, Luna, the Luna, was significant too. Beth knew all too well, for she had grown up, day after day, listening to the importance and the role of the Luna. Every day, after her breakfast, she had to go to her father's study in the pack house and get schooled on all of the most extraordinary Lunas in history. It was often believed that the survival and the feeling of the pack often depended on the Luna. The task of a Luna was not only to produce the next great heir but also to keep the pack together, in harmony with love. The alphas would often be crude and cruel, while the Lunas had to be kind and humble. The ideal example was of her own parents. Carl, in not so many words, could be described as a monster. Beth didn't know the extent of his plans, nor did she want to find out because she feared that she would lose what little respect she had for her father. It was in this instance that she practiced her favorite motto, ignorance is bliss. On the other hand, Maria was the epitome of kindness. It was true that her mother had neglected Beth on many occasions to please Carl. Still, for the pack, Maria was the perfect example of peace, love, and harmony. In times of distress, female pack members, especially those who were pregnant with pups, would come to their Luna, Maria, once every week for the duration of their term. They would also get their unborn pups the blessings of the Luna, and experience the love of the pack. Beth always had to sit through these encounters between her mother and female pack members because she would be Luna one day. She needed to learn the art and the practice of the Luna. It didn't matter who the alpha would be, which now seemed absurd because her father had always wanted it to be Henry. Beth would be Luna. It hurt her many times that her parents never once bothered to ask Beth what she wanted. She had been born with the responsibility on her shoulder, but she never once wanted it. To be a Luna was not something that she wanted, which was perhaps another reason she had been so quick to run away. All Beth wanted was to explore the world. She wanted to travel down to the south and see their ways of living. She wanted to see how different their packs were from their own. Pretty much all of the North followed the same rules, with the exception of the Wilson pack, which was implemented by her own father, but Beth had no idea of the South. She had never been allowed to go, for it was unsafe for the future Luna to venture into a whole new territory, which was neither friend nor foe. And all those times, her own father and Henry had gone. She couldn't accompany them, mainly because her father didn't want the burden of having to look after her and employ his men as her guards when they could be employed elsewhere, and she could be safe at home, her pack. The only idea she had of the South was from the stories she had heard from Henry. He would always promise her, after every trip, that one day he would take her. He wasn't also very keen on telling her about it, for he wanted her to see it for herself, but she knew it was different and much more peaceful. Silently, Beth waited for her mate to return, making a mental note to try and steal as much information as she could from him or anyone else until she had healed from her injuries. She would then ask her mate to travel with her to the South and start their lives together. If he refused, she would still go, alone if she had to. Getting bored, she looked around for any sign of her mate. It was daunting to be alone. Primarily, it was the first time she had been separated from her mother or had stayed a night anywhere but her home. In the distance on her left, Beth saw two golden eyes looking at her. Her body shivered, and the alert to danger disappeared, as quickly as they had been triggered, when she saw that it was her mate. His uncanny ability to change the color of his own eyes was new and indeed mysterious. How much more mysterious her mate would be, Beth had no idea. She relaxed, not breaking eye contact, and he too began to move in her direction once he had seen that she recognized him. In his jaws, he held two rabbits by the tail. Beth realized that he had actually gone hunting for food, which she was insanely glad for because she hadn't eaten anything all day except her breakfast. It swelled her heart to see her mate think so far ahead and wanted to provide for her, even without knowing her. Beth waited until he was right in front of her and nipped his ear lightly to show her appreciation. Her mate dropped the rabbits from his jaw between them, let a trembling howl, and looked at her. To see that he looked terrifying would be an understatement, but Beth needed him to understand that she was just thankful. Cautiously, she tried to mimic his actions, but her mate shook her down as if he anticipated it. Not knowing why she felt the sudden need to express her love to him, she moved again, and this time he laid her. Not only that, as if he understood, he too nipped her ear. To Beth, it meant that he was thankful for having found her. Had they been human, they would have laughed out loud at their antics, but because they were currently animals of the wild, both Beth and her mate howled, looking in the direction of the moon. Once showered in each other's love, her mate pushed the skinnier rabbit in her direction and kept the bigger one for himself. This was yet another test. In the packs of the north, the alpha took the first bite of the meal, and only then would the Luna, followed by the rest of the pack members. Beth knew that her mate would want to take the first bite if he was an alpha. She looked at him and waited. He looked at her and nodded his head in understanding. But before he could take the bite, Beth moved her own canines towards her rabbit. It was the ultimate test because it would be highly disrespectful towards him if he was an alpha. As if on cue, he pushed her rabbit and stared down at her. On the outside, Beth was relaxed, as if she wasn't affected by him, but on the inside, she was falling apart. Being the daughter of an alpha herself, she had met all of the alphas of the Northern Territories in their human form. She didn't know of one who wanted to commit to their wolf self for this long. Trembling, she laid herself on the ground, losing what little appetite she had. She was hungry, starving more like it, but she wasn't sure how to really eat a rabbit, raw. It was her first time in her wolf form, and there was a lot she had yet to accustom herself to. Not to mention, even those who were experienced and older than her parents and the adult wolves, all preferred to keep to the human diet and would only hunt in their wolf form. Their huntings were later cooked in stoves and used to prepare meat. She wasn't really looking forward to eating the rabbit raw, but if it came to it, she had to. She would do everything she had to keep her identity hidden until she knew who her mate was. Her mate, however, it seemed, didn't have any idea of the turmoil inside of her. His gaze had turned soft at Beth's refusal to go after her meal. He moved and picked up the rabbit from where he had thrown it with his jaws and placed it in front of her. Keeping his eyes at Beth, he took a heavy bite of his own rabbit's meat and waited until he had swallowed it before he passed Beth's rabbit to her. Beth knew he was an alpha and a proud one at that. Not wanting to raise any suspicion, she sat up on her paws, trying not to wince as the pain shot up her leg. She looked at her meal and then at her mate, looking at her and waiting for her to start eating. Beth realized how little they knew of each other. Both she and her mate did not know each other at all. They didn't know each other's names. They didn't know each other's origin. They didn't know the likes and dislikes of each other. It was irking to know how unconventional they both had been in finding their soulmate, as the moon goddess had intended it. Her mate had no idea that this was her first time eating raw meat or for the fact that this was the first time she had turned. Closing her eyes, Beth mimicked the same action her mate had done with his rabbit. Once satisfied that Beth was no longer mad at him and had accepted the rabbit as an offering of peace, her mate began to devour his own meal, once again leaving Beth lost to her own thoughts. The taste was weird, and how she had been anticipating it. The rabbit tasted bland, but somehow her wolf was satisfied with the feeling of eating something of the wild. Despite being werewolves, her parents had not schooled Beth much on wolves. They had focused on her education of the responsibilities of a Luna and a proper lady. It was funny to think of. If her mother could see Beth right now, Maria would go berserk to see her sitting in the wild, devouring an animal, blood dripping down her jaws, and her mouth chewing on raw meat. The whole situation would have been funny for Henry as well. She looked at her mate to see him being done with his rabbit and licking off the bones for any meat left. Wolves usually had a large appetite, especially male wolves. There was no way that her mate would have been able to have his fill with only one rabbit. She too was still hungry, or instead, her wolf was. It seemed that her wolf was a whole new personality living inside of her. She had no idea about it, and just like her mate, she didn't know her wolf either. It was sad to really think of how much she had been unaware of her own life. It didn't take her long to finish off her own meal, and once she was done, she threw it away with her jaw. She needed to learn how to hunt if she wanted to be able to survive on her own. Beth made a mental note. Her mate, who had been silent until now, let out a howl and waited for Beth. Not knowing what to do, she followed his action, only to realize that they were both thanking the mood goddess for the meal and each other's company. Once satisfied with her actions, he moved closer to her and curled his body around her sitting frame. The whole thing seemed to be getting weirder by the second. Beth, too, lay down on the ground, knowing it was time to sleep now. It seemed that her mate was happy with Beth being able to understand his body language and this weird form of communication, for he tucked her tail under his frame, careful not to put too much pressure on it, wrapped his paws around her abdomen, and nuzzled against her neck, much like he had done only earlier in the morning. She looked around to see he had his eyes closed, but once again, she found it impossible to fall asleep. Beth tried to take note of what happened. She had run away from her home. She had found her mate. His identity was unknown. She was in unknown territory. She wasn't completely safe. She was getting better at being able to understand her mate's wolf language. Her mate likes to snuggle. She had eaten raw meat. She was a wolf. Her mate liked PDA. She liked his PDA. She was alone. The future was uncertain. She was scared. She missed Henry. She didn't regret running away from her home. She missed her father, well, only a little. She missed her mother a lot. Not knowing how it was possible to have a headache in her wolf form, she felt one anyway. Closing her eyes, she imagined her mother, the only source of comfort in an unfamiliar situation. She remembered the first time she had seen her mother's wolf, the gray wolf, only a few inches bigger than her own, running around the outline of their home, with a 4-year-old Beth sitting on its back. Beth let out an unknowing howl in agony. In pain. Her heart was heavy and bleeding. She was feeling too many emotions at the same time. Until now, Beth had no idea how much she actually loved her mother. She still didn't understand most of her actions and her behavior, but maybe in time, she would. Only one day on her own, Beth had learned more than she had all her life, and now it seemed the doors to a whole new world had opened, one which was full of possibilities within her reach. Beth, too, fell asleep, imagining the first time she had slept under the fur of her mother's wolf, feeling safe and loved.